there have been sources close to the document of Trump's national defense strategy, which is being written right now by Eldridge Colby, that is going to prioritize the homeland over the China threat, and that there's a major departure, these sources are saying, to the defense strategy is going to reverse a years-long mandate to go to war with China. There's been a name change to the Department of Defense as well. And I'll just play what Pete Hegseth had to say about this.
And that's not to disparage our warfighters, whether it's the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or our generation of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's to recognize that this name change is not just about renaming, it's about restoring. Words matter. It's restoring, as you've guided us to, Mr. President, restoring the warrior ethos, restoring victory and clarity as an end state, restoring intentionality to the use of force. At your direction, Mr. President, the War Department is going to fight decisively, not endless conflicts. It's going to fight to win, not to lose. We're going to go on offense, not just on defense. Maximum lethality, not tepid legality. Violent effect, not politically correct. We're going to raise up warriors, not just defenders.
We have the United States building up in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, after the Trump administration killed 11 people on a boat led by drug cartels out of Venezuela with absolutely no evidence. But now we see F-35 jets landing. We have a major buildup of the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force in Venezuela. Now we have the Trump administration supposedly shifting its orientation toward Venezuela. But could you connect all of these things? How are they related?
Yeah, well, you laid it out all very well, Danny. And these issues are related. I'll just start by talking about the rebranding really briefly here. You know, I think this is actually one of the very few good things the Trump administration has done, which is simply taken the mask off of the U.S. empire. And the so-called Department of Defense was never about defense. It was always about war. It was always about empire. The U.S. has militarily intervened hundreds of times all around the world. So, for instance, I did a study looking at official U.S. government data from the Congressional Research Service, the CRS, that found that following 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. military has been involved in over 250 foreign military operations. So this is not defense. This has always been the Department of War. And that was the original name, and it's a more honest name. So, you know, the Trump administration, as Pete Hegseth, the warmongering defense secretary, said so proudly they're taking the mask off the U.S. empire, the veil off. And he said, instead of being politically correct, they want violent effect. They're saying it very clearly. They want war. They want maximum lethality. So no
not
more
legality, no legality, Ben. Anyway, I just want to emphasize this, no legality. Continue.
Yeah, and this came after, I think he said no tepid legality, right? This came after Marco Rubio, probably the second most powerful person in the Trump administration, because he's simultaneously serving not only as the Secretary of State, the head of the State Department, but also National Security Advisor, the head of the National Security Council. He's the second person in U.S. history to simultaneously hold both positions. The first was Henry Kissinger, and we know that Kissinger was one of the most influential people in Washington for many decades. Marco Rubio is, of course, also a lifelong neoconservative warmonger. And Rubio gave a speech in which he said, we don't care about the United Nations. The UN doesn't matter. He said, only what we say matters. And in particular, he was saying, we don't care that the UN says that Venezuela is not involved in the production of drugs. He said, the U.S. courts, the U.S. justice system, a U.S. judge ruled, and U.S. jury claimed that, well, a grand jury, that is, claimed that Venezuela is involved in drug trafficking. Therefore, it's true, because according to the U.S. government, whatever the U.S. says is the uncontestable truth, and they don't care about the rest of the world. They don't care about international law. I mean, this is the definition of a rogue state. What does a rogue state look like? A state that violates all international law, attacks other countries, invades other countries, doesn't care about anyone else in the international community. Everything is based on its own domestic policies. This is what the U.S. is doing. I mean, it's absolutely running rampage. This isn't new, but as I always emphasize, what Trump is doing is he's accelerating trends that have already existed for years, if not decades, but he's just putting the pedal to the metal. Now, in terms of what the Trump administration is doing in terms of its larger foreign policy, I think that I always emphasize that there are two main goals we can understand that the US empire has right now. The biggest overarching goal is trying to contain China. We're in a new Cold War. This is now widely acknowledged in Washington. China has rapidly economically developed. It has moved up the global value chain. It has technologically developed. And China now is competing with US big tech monopolies in the most high-tech sectors, including artificial intelligence, even including now semiconductors, which is why the US is trying to crush China's semiconductors industry. So that's the overarching goal, is to contain China. And related to that, the second major goal is to reassert US hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. So this brings us to the so-called national defense strategy, or the leaked copy that Politico allegedly obtained. Now, this could simply be for PR reasons. They could change the draft. It has not officially been published yet, but they say that the priority is on the Western Hemisphere, not just the US. If you read the article, it's about the Western Hemisphere. So this is reasserting the neo-colonial Monroe Doctrine, right? And so they say that supposedly it's a reversal from the mandate to focus on China. I'm still very skeptical, because there have also been other reports, including the Wall Street Journal obtained an internal memo from inside Pete Hegseth's former Defense Department, now War Department, in which they said that the most important priority is preparing for war with China. So, you know, Danny, I mean, a lot of people watching this will know that what these reports often do in the media is they muddy the waters, right? The Trump administration wants to put out a particular narrative. Trump says we're pursuing peace. Well, he renamed the Defense Department to the War Department. I mean, it's so contradictory in so many ways. Trump says we stopped multiple wars. Well, he's renaming the Pentagon the War Department and boasting about how they're going to be maximally lethal in their new wars. So I'm still skeptical about this, but what this underscores is the fact that the U.S. is really heavily emphasizing its hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. So what does that mean? It means that the U.S. is going to increasingly threaten other countries in Latin America. It's going to threaten, in particular, Mexico and Venezuela, which we see now. It's also threatening Canada. And of course, Greenland is in the Western Hemisphere. And Trump wants to take over and colonize Greenland. Now, he wants Greenland for a few reasons. One, Greenland has potentially trillions of dollars worth of critical minerals, which are very important because the U.S. is trying to remove China from its supply chains for critical minerals, because many of these minerals are needed for not only advanced technologies, but in particular military technology. And if the U.S. is preparing for war with China, it can't have China in the supply chain for the minerals that it needs to make the weapons to wage war on China. So that's one important reason from the perspective of the U.S. empire to colonize Greenland. Another is that as the U.S. is trying to assert control over the Western Hemisphere, the U.S. does not want China and Russia to access the Arctic going to the north of Greenland, because now what we see with climate change accelerating, especially with Trump's drill baby drill policies, Trump is closing down, solar and wind projects and telling fossil fuel companies to drill baby drill. And as climate change gets worse, it's going to open up new trade routes in the Arctic. And the U.S. is concerned that China and Russia would have access to these trade routes, and in particular could go across the north of Greenland. So the U.S. wants to put even more military bases on Greenland. The U.S. already has one, but it wants to make many more to militarize the Arctic region. So all of this is related to militarizing the Western Hemisphere, turning it into a U.S. zone of imperial sphere of influence. And this means attacking the sovereignty of independent sovereign countries in the region. So I already talked about the attempt to colonize Greenland, but Venezuela is a key part of this as well. Venezuela has been a major player in pushing for a more multipolar world going back decades. In fact, former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez was talking about the necessity of a multipolar world in 1998, just 7 years after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. This was the peak of the unipolar era of US domination. And Hugo Chavez, when he was running for president in 1998 in Venezuela, he said that we are living in a unipolar world, but we can see the multipolar world on the horizon. We need a multipolar world so the countries of the global south, which are the global majority, can have an actual voice on the global stage. So they're no longer treated like neo-colonies by the US empire. So Venezuela, through its revolution, the Bolivarian Revolution, starting under Chavez and now under Nicolás Maduro, has always played a very important role in working with China and Russia and also Iran and in trying to build a more multipolar world, in supporting Palestine always, in supporting other anti-colonial movements and revolutionary movements in the global south, in Burkina Faso now. It also has good relations with Vietnam. Of course, in Latin America, it's close to Cuba, all these countries that have been attacked constantly by the US. And then, of course, there's the fact that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. And the US really wants to get access to those. In fact, Donald Trump's former national security advisor in his first term, the neoconservative war hawk John Bolton, let the cat out of the bag. And in an interview on Fox News, right at the beginning of the coup attempt that Trump launched during his first term in 2019 with Juan Guaido, we can talk more about that nonsense, where the U.S. tried to impose a puppet as the fake president of Venezuela, even though he never participated in a presidential election. Well, Bolton admitted right at the beginning of that coup attempt that U.S. corporations wanted to get access to Venezuelan oil. And of course, there's the issue of de-dollarization, which you talked about. Venezuela has been playing a key role in the global drive for de-dollarization. Again, going back decades, Venezuela has always been in the vanguard of this, right? So now in the past few years, there's more and more discussion of de-dollarization. But Hugo Chavez was talking about de-dollarization 20 years ago, saying, why are we selling our oil in dollars? We should be trading in other currencies and investing in other currencies. And the US dollar is a tool of subordination. It is used to violate our sovereignty. So we could talk much more about Venezuela. There are so many factors linked together here. But I'm glad you linked the issue of Venezuela to the new Cold War on China and the overall US imperial strategy, because they are related, which is that, again, the two main priorities are weakening China. Ideally, the US would like to contain and destabilize China, but obviously that's not looking very realistic. But to weaken China is number one. And number two is to reassert US hegemony over the entire Western Hemisphere, which means telling countries in the region they cannot have relations with China and Russia and Iran, which is what the US government has been saying also under Democrats, under Joe Biden. But under Trump, again, he's accelerating this. And the message is very explicitly imperialist. And that's what we also see with the renaming of the Pentagon as the defense, as the War Department. They're taking the veil off of the U.S. empire and exposing the blunt fist of the U.S. empire.
Kind of debates raging already about what the true intentions of the Trump administration. I'm glad that you continue to assert, because I continue to believe this is the case, that actually the Trump administration is not necessarily moving away from what is a top U.S. foreign policy establishment objective, which is to contain China, but it is to essentially just move to a different theater, which is perhaps more doable at the moment, or at least perceived to be more doable. And I want to just play another clip from the one and only very special guy, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War now, because I think it gets into some of the confusion people may have by what is very careful political calculations with language here. So I just want to play this. Here we go.
Well, unfortunately, the weakness of the previous administration has driven Russia and China closer together. That was a terrible development of a lack of American leadership and a lack of American strength. And you saw it around the world, and it manifests in what we saw on TV last night. But that's why President Trump has charged us at the Defense Department to be prepared, to rebuild our military in historic ways, to restore the warrior ethos and reestablish deterrence, not because we seek conflict. We do not. And we've been clear about that with China or Russia or others, but because by being prepared, you prevent it.
So, Ben, we obviously know that with the United States, when the political class in any one of these, whether it's Department of War now or president, we know that word is bond and that we can totally trust them. So Russia and China have nothing to worry about. So I want your reaction to this, Ben, because what he just said there is exactly what he said to Trump and during this whole name change fiasco. And it still does point to Russia and China as the kind of ultimate focus, but deterrence and preventing conflict, quote unquote, rather than starting it and escalating, yet still using the language of preparing, which, as Pete Hegseth has said many times before, means preparing for war. So preparing for war for peace.
Yeah, well, this is always the Orwellian rhetoric of the U.S. empire. They have to wage war in order to advance peace. In fact, Pete Hegseth constantly reiterates the slogan of his old platoon when he was in the U.S. military, which is, we must, in order to prepare for peace, we must prepare for war, something along those lines. I mean, again, it's just war is peace, peace is war. And, Hegseth is a very funny guy because he's really kind of an actor, like Zelensky is an actor. So who is Pete Hegseth? Where does he come from? So, yeah, he was in the U.S. military, but he was not a major military officer. He is a Fox News host. So he was in the military for a few years, and then he went to Harvard, by the way. So, it's so funny because the Trump administration loves to portray itself as populist and attack what they call the elites. And they redefine the elites as, prominent liberals, as if like they're the real elites and not billionaire oligarchs in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street who fill Trump's administration. I mean, Elon Musk is no longer in his administration, but Elon Musk is the world's richest man. If he's not part of the elite, that word means absolutely nothing. Furthermore, Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, is a billionaire hedge fund manager from Wall Street, who previously worked for George Soros, and yet apparently he's not part of the elite. And then you look at Trump, anyway, I mean, I could go on and on. There are a dozen billionaires in the Trump administration, including Trump himself. And by the way, the Trump family just earned $5 billion, according to the Wall Street Journal, by launching another crypto scheme. So, I mean, if they're not part of the elite, they're literal billionaires. The point I'm getting at is that, so Hegseth, this Harvard-educated LARPer, he was a Fox News host. Trump watched him frequently on Fox News and said, I like this guy. I'm going to make him the head of the Pentagon. And I always emphasize, Danny, we've talked about this a few times on past streams. In 2020, Hegseth published an insane book called American Crusade, in which he said very clearly, proudly, that the U.S. right wing, which he identifies strongly as part of, is waging a holy war. He used that term, a holy war and a crusade. And he said, who are the main targets of this holy war? China, number one, China, the international left, and also Islam, and in particular, Iran. He also hates Turkey because Turkey's a Muslim majority country. Anyway, it's a member of NATO, whatever. So this is the guy who's now heading the Department of War. And in that book, American Crusade, he said very clearly that he wants to overthrow the Chinese government. And he said that China will be licking its wounds for hundreds of years. So he wants a new century of humiliation in China. I mean, if you're in Beijing, they have very smart analysts and researchers who I'm sure have read Pete Hegseth's book, and they know about his views on China. So, okay, maybe they release a defense strategy, a national defense strategy that says, we don't want war. Our priority is the Western Hemisphere. Okay, but this is mostly for public relations reasons anyway. Do we really think that the Pentagon is publishing its most important strategy, its most important internal assessment and information about where it plans to go in the future? No, the whole point of the National Defense Strategy is it's a public relations exercise, right? So the whole narrative of the Trump administration is we are focusing on domestic politics, make America great again, all that nonsense. Well, in reality, they're trying to assert U.S. hegemony around the world. This is why they're continuing the genocide in Gaza. Trump is planning on ethnically cleansing all Palestinians out of Gaza to make luxury real estate there. They have an official ethnic cleansing plan now that has been leaked. What does that have to do with Make America Great Again? What does it have to do with the national defense strategy saying that they're going to only focus on the Western Hemisphere? Obviously, nothing to do with it, because, I mean, the reality is it's about U.S. empire. That continues to always be the priority. And what this also shows is that even if we could believe Trump, and no one can believe Trump, even his own supporters, look at all the Epstein stuff. I mean, he's a chronic liar. But even if we could believe Trump, and he truly, as an individual, wanted to withdraw the U.S. from all these foreign wars and such, the U.S. imperial machine is a massive apparatus with millions of people in it, tons of gears and all of these different parts in this massive machine. The U.S. president is powerful, but can't entirely move the direction of that empire. Look at Trump's first term. All he did was wage more wars, started the war on Iran that Trump continued now in his second term. I mean, you can go on and on and on. So this is just public relations. These leaks in Politico from anonymous sources inside the Trump administration, it's all part of this ridiculous narrative. Meanwhile, as we're speaking, they're threatening to bomb or even invade Venezuela. What does that have to do with Make America Great Again? Obviously nothing. They say it has to do with drugs. It's complete nonsense. Venezuela is not a major drug producer.
It's like WMDs in my opinion. Yeah.
Marco Rubio says the UN doesn't matter. But look at the data from experts at the United Nations, leading experts on the drug trade. The majority of cocaine in the world comes from Colombia, historically the closest U.S. ally in South America. Now, for the first time ever, Colombia has a left-wing leader, Gustavo Petro, and the U.S. has been trying to destabilize him. But Colombia, everyone knows, is the epicenter of drug production, not Venezuela. It's Venezuela's neighbor. Similarly, Ecuador has become a major center for drugs under another close U.S. ally. Basically, throughout the history of Latin America, the closer a leader was to the U.S., the more likely they were to be involved in drug trafficking. So in the case of Ecuador, it's currently governed by a billionaire fail son. His name is Daniel Noboa. He's the son of the richest billionaire oligarch in the country. And everyone knows, it's been widely reported, that the father of Noboa, the father of the president, is closely linked to the Albanian mafia, and he personally owns ports, privatized ports in Ecuador that he uses to put cocaine in banana crates. I mean, it's incredible that under this kind of neo-colonial regime, the U.S. empire has tried to turn Ecuador back into a so-called banana republic, where the president is the son of the billionaire oligarch who uses banana crates to ship cocaine. And there's no discussion of that because Noboa is one of the closest U.S. allies or puppets in the region. And he rammed through a law that allows the U.S. military to access Ecuador anytime it wants without getting permission from the Ecuadorian government. The U.S. has been colonizing Ecuador, and that's what the U.S. empire wants to do to Venezuela. And it's what it wants to do to every other country in the region, to turn them all into vassals run by these right-wing oligarchs, these billionaires who serve the interests of U.S. corporations. Ecuador is unfortunately the perfect example of what the U.S. sees for the region. By the way, I mentioned this billionaire fail son, Noboa. He's a U.S. citizen. You know where he was born? He was born in Florida. And yet he's the president of Ecuador. He's literally an American running Ecuador on behalf of U.S. corporations and his billionaire dad. This is the vision the U.S. has for Latin America, and this is why they're so obsessed with overthrowing Venezuela's independent revolutionary government.